Happy Easter. I've got to tell you a story, one of the strangest things that I've ever seen. It was early on Friday morning, and I noticed this young man, handsome and strong, walking up and down Main Street, pulling an old cart filled with clothes, both bright and new. He was calling out in a clear voice, "Rags! New rags for old! I take your tired old rags, give me your rags!" I thought, this is really strange. Never seen anything like this before. He was a tall man, young, fit, 6'4" maybe. His arms were like tree limbs, hard and muscular, and his eyes flashed with compassion. I thought, can he find a better job than this, to be a rag man in our little city? So I followed him. My curiosity was driving me, and I'll tell you, I wasn't disappointed. I soon saw the rag man approach a woman sitting on her front porch. She was sobbing into a dirty old handkerchief, sighing, shedding what seemed like 1,000 tears. Her knees and her elbows made a sad X, and her shoulders shook. I could tell her heart was breaking. The ragman stopped his cart, and he quietly approached this woman, stepping around trash on the front yard, dead toys, broken furniture, dirty Pampers. "Give me your rag," he said gently, "and I'll give you another." He slipped the handkerchief from her hands. She looked up, and he laid across her hands a linen cloth so clean and new that it shone. She blinked from the gift to the giver. Then, as he began to pull his cart again, the ragman did a strange thing. He put her stained handkerchief to his own face, and then he began to weep, to sob as much as she had done before, his shoulders shaking. I looked back at the woman and noticed that she was left without a tear. I thought, this is a wonder. I breathed to myself, and I followed the sobbing ragman like a child who can't turn away from a mystery. He continued, "Rags, rags, new rags for old," through his sobs. In a little while, as the sky turned a little bit darker, I could see curtains hanging out black windows, and the ragman came upon a little girl who was sitting on the curb with her head wrapped in a bandage. Her eyes were empty. She seemed to stare blankly. Blood soaked the bandage, and a single line of blood ran down her cheek. The ragman looked upon this child with pity, and he pulled out of his cart a lovely little yellow Easter bonnet. He said, "Girl, give me your rag." And tracing a line down her cheek, he said, "I'll give you mine." The child only gazed back at him blankly as if she couldn't answer. So he loosened the bandage, removed it, and he tied it to his own head. And then he set the bonnet on her head. And I gasped at what I saw, for with the bandage went the wound. Against his brow it ran a darker, more substantial blood, his own. He continued to call out, "Rags, rags, I take old rags." Now he was not only sobbing, but bleeding, the strong, intelligent ragman. The sun ran up in the sky and now into my eyes, and I could see the ragman seeming to hurry more and more. He saw a man leaning against a pole, and he said, "Are you going to work?" The man shook his head. The ragman pressed him, "Don't you have a job?" The man said, "Are you crazy?" He pulled away from the pole, and he revealed the right sleeve of his jacket flat, the cuff stuffed into his pocket. He had no arm. He said, "I can't work." The one-armed man took off his jacket. The ragman said, "Give it to me, and I'll give you mine." And he gave him a brand new jacket. But amazingly, the ragman's arm stayed in his sleeve, and when the other man put it on, he had two good arms, and the ragman only had one. He said, "Now go to work." The ragman continued on, "Rags, rags, new rags for old, give me your rags." And he found a drunk man lying unconscious beneath an old army blanket. This old man, hunched over and sick, the ragman took the blanket and wrapped it around himself. But for the drunk, he gave an entirely new set of clothes and a new blanket. And as he left, it seemed like the ragman was now old and drunken. He was weeping uncontrollably, bleeding freely from his forehead, pulling his cart with his now one arm, stumbling for drunkenness, falling again and again, exhausted, old and sick. Yet he went on as quickly as he could. Like on spider's legs, he skittered through the alleys of our city, this mile and the next, until he came to the city limits and rushed beyond into the dump. I wept to see the change in this man. I hurt to see his sorrow. And yet, I wanted to see where he was going. He came to the landfill, to the garbage pits, and I waited to help him with what he was doing, trying to help him pull that heavy cart with one arm up a hill. He climbed up on top of this little hill and cleared a space. And then he pillowed his head on that dirty handkerchief and the jacket. He covered his bones with the army blanket, and he died. Oh, how I cried to witness that death. I slumped into a junked car, and I wailed and I mourned as someone with no hope, because I'd come to love that ragman. Every other face had faded in the wonder of this man, and I cherished him, but he died. I sobbed myself to sleep. I didn't know, how could I know, that I slept through Friday night, and Saturday night as well. But then light, pure, hard, demanding light, slammed against my sour face, and I blinked and looked, and I saw the greatest wonder of all. There was the ragman, folding the blanket, the dirty army blanket, most carefully. A scar on his forehead, but alive. And besides that, healthy and strong. There was no sorrow, no sign of age, and all the rags that he had gathered were clean. Well, when I lowered my head and trembled for all of that I'd seen, I myself walked up to the ragman. I told him my name and my sins with shame. I was a sorry figure next to him. So I took off all my clothes out there in that junkyard, and I said to him with a deep yearning in my voice, "Dress me." And he exchanged my old rags for new. My new rags on me, now I'm a wonder beside him, the ragman, the Christ. That old story by a man named Walter Wangerin, the ragman, is a beautiful story of the Christ who takes our old rags and exchanges them for new.